Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. We are absolutely thrilled to have you with us today.
Yeah, we really are. And whether you are, listening while prepping for a big meeting or commuting to work, or maybe you are just insanely curious about the hidden gears that make our world turn media, you are in exactly the right place.
You definitely are, because today we are taking a massive stack of source material and basically boiling it down to the most crucial, mind-bending insights.
It is a really fascinating window into the mechanics of local versus national governance.
Exactly. The material we have touches on the deep, honestly, intensely messy complexities of migration, the friction of local neighborhood politics, and this is the big one. It culminates in a profound philosophical clash of constitutional rights.
Rights that affect every single citizen living in a modern democracy.
Okay, let's unpack this.
It really is a remarkable conversation we are mapping out today. We are going to be exploring the intense friction that occurs when high-level, abstract national ideologies violently collide with the very real, very grounded realities of a local neighborhood.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate story of what happens when the theoretical pavement meets the bureaucratic ivory tower.
I love that framing. And to give you, the listener, a clear picture of what we are examining today, our deep dive is entirely centered on a specific, very extensive interview.
Right.
It's from the Dutch YouTube channel called De Nieuwe Wereld, specifically episode number 233. And in this conversation, an interviewer named Martin Sommer sits down for a highly detailed, incredibly candid talk with a politician named Rita Verdonk.
And just to set the stage, based entirely on what we are looking at in the text, who exactly is Rita Verdonk?
So she is a former Dutch minister. She served at the absolute highest levels of national government from 2003 to 2007.
And the background provided notes that during her time in national politics, she was simultaneously the most popular and the most hated politician in The Hague.
Which is saying something.
It really is. That alone tells you we are dealing with a polarizing, highly influential figure who leaves a massive impact wherever she goes.
But the twist, the really interesting part, is that more recently, she stepped out of that national spotlight. She spent 4 years serving as a city council member for a local municipal party called Hart voor Den Haag, which translates to Hart for the Hague.
So she is someone who has stood at the very peak of the national political mountain and then intentionally climbed down to fight in the muddy trenches of municipal city council debates.
Which gives her a uniquely dual perspective.
It does. And I need to step in here before we get into the weeds of her arguments. I want to take a quick moment for a reality check with you, our listener.
Definitely necessary.
Because we are dealing with a polarizing figure today, and we are touching on highly sensitive lightning rod issues.
Oh.
Things like national asylum policies, the integration of different religious groups, and crime statistics involving specific demographics.
Right.
I want to be crystal clear up front. We are leaving our own politics at the door today. Our job is absolutely not to take a side.
None at all.
We are not here to validate or endorse Rita Verdonk's viewpoints. We are also not here to endorse Martin Sommer's pushback or any specific political ideology, left, right, or center.
We are keeping this completely impartial.
Exactly. Our only mission is to act as your tour guides through their arguments. We are here to trace the architecture of this specific conversation so you can see exactly why local politics is so incredibly volatile right now. We are just the messengers mapping out the friction purely based on what is discussed in the transcript.
I love that. We are the tour guides to the ideas, nothing more, nothing less. And the mission for this deep dive is incredibly compelling.
It really is.
We want to explore why local politics so often feels like hitting a brick wall for the people who are actually trying to make changes. We want to look at how sweeping national policies end up clashing with the daily, mundane realities of people living in specific neighborhoods.
And ultimately, we are going to build up to a massive dilemma. What happens when the fundamental rights in a modern democracy directly compete with one another?
So let's jump right into section 1. Let's talk about the reality of local politics.
This is where the conversation really lays bare the structural frustrations of local governance. The interview actually takes place just 2 weeks before local municipal elections in The Hague.
And Verdonk is making a definitive exit. After 4 years as a city council member, she is leaving politics behind entirely.
She is very firm about it.
But the electoral math happening in the background of her exit is what I find so fascinating. Her local party, Hart voor Den Haag, which is led by a politician named Richard de Mos, is polling incredibly well.
Right. The numbers in the source are huge.
They are projected to get 14 or 15 seats out of a total of 45 in the city council. By a massive margin, that makes them the largest single party.
Yeah, the next closest competitors are sitting around just 8 or 9 seats.
So logically speaking, if you are the listener looking at this, if you are the biggest party by a landslide, you hold all the cards, right? You should be the ones shaping the future of the city. Why is she walking away when her party is basically winning?
Because in a proportional representation system, winning the most votes does not automatically grant you the power to govern.
Right.
This highlights a fascinating, often maddening structural reality of parliamentary and council democracies. Being the largest party means absolutely nothing if the ideological gap between you and the other parties prevents you from building a governing coalition.
Let's break down that math because it is crucial.
Okay, so in a 45-seat council, you need a strict mathematical majority to govern. That means 23 seats.
Okay.
Verdonk breaks down this math to explain her profound frustration. She says, okay, we have 14 seats. If we look for logical partners on the more conservative or right-leaning side of the spectrum, there is the mainstream conservative party, the VVD. But they only have 4 seats.
So 14 plus 4, that brings the total to 18.
Exactly. You are still 5 seats short of a majority.
So they have to look across the aisle, so to speak.
They do. They have to look at the more progressive social liberal parties. One of those parties, D66, has 8 seats, which would theoretically bridge the gap perfectly.
But there is a catch.
A huge one. Verdonk explicitly notes that this progressive party completely refuses to work with them due to deep, unbridgeable ideological divides. There are a couple of other combinations, maybe with the Labour Party or the Green Party, who have 9 seats combined, but again, the ideological gap is too wide, so you hit a structural impasse.
So what is the inevitable outcome of that math? If the biggest party is mathematically locked out, who runs the city?
The math forces the other, smaller parties to band together to form a majority coalition that actively excludes the biggest party.
Wow.
Verdonk realizes that to form a functional government, the mainstream conservatives, the progressive liberals, the Labour Party, and the Green Party will all likely have to join forces.
And from her perspective, the moment those specific parties enter a coalition together, everything her local party has fought for over the last 4 years is effectively erased.
Particularly their strict stance on local asylum policy.
Because the new coalition will just implement their own agenda, completely bypassing the party that actually got the most individual votes. It is easy to see how that creates a feeling of profound powerlessness.
She actually describes the atmosphere in the Hague City Council as deeply unpleasant.
Yeah, she talks about sitting in these meetings, biting her lip, looking around the room and thinking, we are the highest organ in this city, we supposedly have the power, but what are we actually doing here?
It is this realization that a massive mandate from the voters can be completely neutralized by coalition mechanics.
It is the ultimate bureaucratic brick wall. And it is this exact feeling of being blocked inside the council chambers that gave rise to a highly specific, very aggressive political strategy that her party employs.
Right, the concept they call ombuds politics.
I really want to dig into ombuds politics because the conversation spends quite a bit of time on it, and it feels like a trend we are seeing globally, even if it goes by different names. What exactly is it?
From how they describe it, it is essentially taking politics directly out of the formal council chambers and putting it onto the literal streets to solve hyper-local, hyper-specific grievances for individual citizens.
The term comes from ombudsman.
Right, exactly. An official appointed to investigate individuals' complaints against maladministration. Verdonk notes that while other politicians might do a bit of neighborhood outreach here and there, her party leader made it their absolute core identity.
When the massive bureaucratic machine of the city ignores a citizen, the ombuds politician steps in to make that citizen feel heard, seen, and vindicated.
And there is this incredible, highly visual story they discuss that perfectly illustrates ombuds politics in action.
Oh, this is such a wild image.
It involves one of their politicians, a man named Carlos Martinez Van Andel. He is number 16 on their party list. And he has made it his absolute crusade to combat the issue of overflowing underground trash containers and the resulting rat infestations in the city.
And the way he does it is pure theater.
It is. He drives this massive luxury Jaguar car, and he will drive this huge Jaguar right up to these disgusting overflowing piles of garbage in a residential neighborhood.
He literally parks his luxury car right next to the rats and the mess.
He gets out and starts filming videos to post on social media. He publicly shames the municipality, broadcasting the failure directly to the voters and effectively forcing the city's hand to come clean it up.
He takes a hidden, ignored problem and makes it highly visible and highly embarrassing for the sitting government.
It is a brilliant, almost theatrical illustration of political strategy meeting genuine community service. If we analyze the underlying psychology of this, so what for the voter, we have to ask, why does a politician in a Jaguar filming garbage win so much local support?
Well, it works because it highlights a profound, painful disconnect in modern governance. Voters frequently feel completely alienated by large, abstract, bureaucratic systems.
Think about it from the citizen's perspective.
Let me give you an analogy. It is like when you have a terrible experience with a massive corporation. Say your internet goes down for a week. You call customer service, you get an automated voice menu, you wait on hold for an hour, and finally, someone reads you a scripted apology and says a technician might look at it next quarter.
You feel completely powerless.
Exactly. But imagine if the CEO of that internet company suddenly pulled up to your driveway, looked at the broken wire, took a video of it, and yelled at his own team to fix it right now.
Yeah.
The relief, the validation you would feel that this politician is providing.
That is a perfect analogy. When a citizen complains about rats on their street and gets an automated email from the city council saying a committee will review the waste management protocol in the next fiscal year, they feel entirely abandoned.
Yes.
The formal political process, submitting motions, debating amendments, is invisible and incomprehensible to the average person dealing with a daily nuisance.
But when a local politician physically drives to your street, stands next to the pile of trash you have to smell every single morning, and publicly demands action right then and there, it validates the citizen's lived reality.
I want you, the listener, to pause and think about that for a second. Think about your own local government, your own town or city council.
How often do grand, high-minded national ideologies get in the way of simply getting the potholes filled or the trash picked up on your street?
How often do you feel like the people making decisions in a distant municipal building have absolutely no idea what it actually smells like outside your front door?
That is the exact gap that Ombuds Politics tries to fill.
However, Verdonk is also very clear-eyed about the limitations of this strategy.
What does she mean?
She points out that as an opposition council member, you can film all the trash you want, you can make viral videos, and you can submit endless written motions, but you cannot actually force the daily executive board of the city to enact systemic change.
So it's a Band-Aid.
Essentially, you can force them to clean up one pile of garbage through public shaming, but you cannot change the overall waste management budget. You are still, ultimately, hitting that structural brick wall.
Which is a perfect, albeit frustrating, transition into one of the most intense and contentious issues discussed in this entire conversation.
Right.
The feeling of local citizens hitting a brick wall when dealing with massive municipal plans brings us to Section 2 of our deep dive, the Haga Hospital.
This is a massive, multi-layered case study.
It serves as a perfect microcosm of the entire national asylum debate, but played out on a single street corner in The Hague.
The Haga Hospital situation is where abstract national policy violently crashes into local neighborhood reality. We need to look closely at the specifics of this plan to understand the friction.
Okay, let's lay out the facts of the Haga Hospital plan exactly as they discuss it. There is an old former hospital located on the sport lawn in The Hague. Geographically, it is situated right in the middle of a quiet residential neighborhood.
And the local government has proposed a plan to renovate this massive building and turn it into a shelter to house 750 people.
Now, 750 people is a massive influx for any single street, but who exactly are we talking about here? Is it a homogeneous group?
Not at all. It is a highly mixed demographic, which makes the management of the facility significantly more complex.
Break down the numbers for us.
The breakdown discussed includes 440 asylum seekers who are currently navigating the legal process. On top of that, there are about 40 status holders. These are asylum seekers who have officially been granted a residence permit and are waiting for permanent housing.
Okay, so that's almost 500 people right there.
Right. The rest of the 750 spots are meant to be filled by a mix of homeless families, young adults who are transitioning out of state youth care facilities and trying to live independently for the first time, and some university students.
So you are taking hundreds of people from very disparate backgrounds, some who have fled war zones, some who are struggling with local homelessness, young adults lacking support networks, and putting them all under one roof in a residential area.
And Verdonk points out the context of this neighborhood. She describes it as an area where small business owners, middle-class people, have worked incredibly hard for years to be able to afford to buy their houses.
It is a settled, quiet area, suddenly facing an overnight demographic shock.
Which is why Verdonk's party is vehemently opposed to it. Their broader political stance is that The Hague is, in their words, full and cannot accommodate more asylum seekers.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because in this specific debate, she doesn't just rely on broad political slogans. She anchors her opposition in a very specific, highly documented past failure that occurred on that exact same plot of land.
History is repeating itself right in front of them.
She points out that previously, a portion of this exact same Haga hospital site was used by the city as a temporary winter shelter for homeless individuals. It operated during the coldest months, from November to May.
And initially, this winter shelter was designed to house just 120 people. Just 120.
But even with that relatively small number, the situation quickly devolved.
The conversation gets into the grim specifics of how unmanageable it became. Verdonk details how the surrounding neighborhood was completely disrupted. Residents reported people from the shelter sleeping in their private front gardens.
Wow.
There were widespread issues of public defecation in the area. And in the nearby Fahrenheitstraat, which is a popular local shopping street, the small business owners experienced a massive, undeniable spike in theft and shoplifting.
It got so bad that the city had to intervene.
Yes. The disruption to public order was so severe and the complaints so overwhelming that the city government was actually forced to step in and reduce the shelter's capacity. They had to downsize it from 120 people down to 80 people just to maintain a baseline of control.
So if we synthesize her argument here, it is devastatingly simple and logical. She's looking at the city council and saying, you demonstrably failed to manage the safety and public order surrounding a shelter of just 120 people. It was such a disaster, you had to shrink it to 80. So how on earth can you look these residents in the eye and promise them you can safely manage 750 people in that exact same building?
It is a staggering leap in scale, multiplying the population nearly tenfold when the original, smaller model failed.
And to bolster this concern, the interviewer, Martin Sommer, introduces a parallel case study from another city.
He brings up a location called Stekoost in Amsterdam. This was another high-profile project that attempted a very similar mixed demographic housing model, throwing asylum seekers, status holders, and students into a shared living environment.
And Sommer notes that this isn't just hearsay. A well-known, highly respected Dutch investigative journalism television program called Zembla did a deep dive documentary on Stekoost.
They exposed the reality of what was happening inside that building, and it was terrifying.
What did they find?
The documentary revealed severe safety issues, widespread threats, an atmosphere of pervasive fear, and tragically, multiple instances of sexual assault, particularly in the shared spaces and hallways outside the private living quarters.
The introduction of the Zembla documentary into the conversation is vital because it brings independent, expert analysis into the political debate.
Sommer points out that the journalists investigating the failures at Stekoost consulted with sociologists and housing experts who specialize in these specific types of combination housing plans.
And what did the experts say?
The consensus from those experts was incredibly stark. They stated that mixing these vulnerable and diverse demographics can work, but only under extremely strict parameters.
Okay.
The experts cited concluded that the absolute maximum safe capacity for such a mixed plan is between 50 and 100 people.
50 to 100 people. And the local government in The Hague is pushing forward with a plan for 750 people.
That means they are proposing a facility that is literally 7.5 times larger than what independent experts say is the absolute safe, manageable limit.
Verdonk says she brought this exact expertise, she brought the Zembla documentary, she brought these exact warnings forward in debates with the city alderman responsible for the project.
And what happened?
She describes hitting another brick wall, a bureaucratic wall of denial, where the expert advice was simply brushed aside because it was inconvenient to the city's goals.
This refusal to engage with the expert limits leads us into what Verdonk views as a deeply troubling systemic conflict of interest regarding the safety of the neighborhood.
Right, because the residents surrounding the Haga hospital were understandably panicked about the 750-person plan. So the city alderman promised to ease their minds by producing a comprehensive safety plan.
But it turns into a bureaucratic farce.
Verdonk points out that the residents and the council waited for over 2 years for this safety plan to materialize.
2 years.
And when it was finally produced, it only covered the security protocols for the inside of the building.
It provided absolutely no strategy, no budget, and no plan for the safety of the surrounding neighborhood, which was the entire reason the plan was requested in the first place.
The residents weren't just worried about what happens in the hallways. They were worried about their front gardens, the shopping street, the public spaces.
And the plan essentially concluded with a shrug, stating, "The municipality and the local police will just have to solve any issues outside as they arise."
Which, as she rightly points out, is exactly what the municipality and the police entirely failed to do when there were only 120 people in the winter shelter.
But the controversy deepens significantly when we look at who actually wrote this safety plan.
This is the crazy part.
Verdonk had specifically requested that a completely independent third-party organization draft the safety assessment to ensure objectivity.
But she discovers a massive catch. The supposedly independent party that the municipality hired to assess the safety risks actually has deep, ongoing contractual ties with the COA.
Now, to clarify for the listener, the COA is the central agency for the reception of asylum seekers. They are the massive national government body responsible for housing refugees.
And this is where the conflict of interest becomes glaring. Let's unpack the mechanics of this.
The COA is the organization that is desperately, urgently looking for those 440 asylum beds to solve a national housing crisis. Furthermore, the COA is the financial engine behind this entire local project. They are providing the massive funding required to renovate the old hospital, and they are paying for the security personnel.
So let's use an analogy to understand how crazy this is.
Please do.
Imagine a massive chemical company wants to build a new factory in your town, but the town is worried about pollution. So the town hires an independent environmental inspector to write a safety report.
Okay.
But then you find out that the inspector's biggest, most lucrative client is the exact same chemical company that wants to build the factory. It is like letting the fox audit the henhouse's security budget.
That is precisely the dynamic Verdonk is calling out. She argues that the entire financial business case for renovating the Haga hospital relies absolutely on the presence of those 440 asylum seekers.
Without the COA's money, the project dies.
Therefore, if the safety assessment were to genuinely conclude that putting 750 people in that neighborhood is too dangerous, the whole financial house of cards collapses.
Verdonk is raising a massive, waving red flag about the objectivity of local governance. She's asking, how can any agency accurately and independently assess the safety risks to a local neighborhood when their own financial client, the COA, requires the project to be approved to solve a national political crisis?
It is a stunning accusation. She is essentially describing a closed-loop bureaucracy where the outcome of a safety audit is predetermined by financial necessity and national pressure rather than genuine concern for the local residents.
And this intense debate over safety, crime, and risk assessment naturally bleeds into an even more volatile part of their conversation.
Which brings us to Section 3, Statistics, Culture, and the Concept of the Double Moral.
Yes. But I need to step in here and offer another reminder to our listeners.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
We are entering a section of the conversation that deals with highly sensitive, incredibly provocative crime statistics and cultural critiques. As always, we are neutrally reporting the exact arguments and numbers presented in this specific interview.
We are analyzing how these statistics are used to build political arguments without offering any endorsement or validation of the data or the conclusions drawn from it.
Thank you. So, let's look at how they frame this debate. It starts by looping back to the sexual assaults that occurred at the Stek Oost facility in Amsterdam.
Martin Sommer recounts a fascinating and disturbing detail about the political reaction to those crimes. He discusses how the Amsterdam City Council reacted when the Zembla documentary exposed the assaults.
And it wasn't a policy overhaul.
No, instead of initiating a massive overhaul of the housing policy, he describes a political attitude in the council that essentially minimized the specific cultural context of the crimes.
The prevailing sentiment was roughly, well, there are men with penises everywhere.
It was a deliberate attempt to generalize the danger, suggesting that all men inherently pose an equal risk to women, regardless of their background, culture, or origin.
Sommer expresses shock that such serious specific incidents were essentially laughed off or philosophically justified in this manner just to protect a political housing project.
Verdonk fiercely capitalizes on this anecdote to launch her critique. To counter the Amsterdam City Council's premise that all men pose an equal statistical risk, the conversation introduces specific statistics pulled from a book called De Migratiemagneet, or The Migration Magnet, written by a researcher named Van de Beek.
And the numbers they cite from this source are stark.
Very stark. The statistics presented claim that if you take a sample of 10,000 native-born Dutch men, 3 of them will be registered as suspects in sexual crimes.
Okay, 3 out of 10,000.
However, when looking at a sample of 10,000 Somali men in the Netherlands, the number cited jumps to 57.
Summer actually pauses to do the math out loud during the interview, emphasizing the scale of the disparity. He points out that 57 compared to 3 is nearly a 20-fold increase in statistical probability.
Verdonk adds to this by stating that other specific demographic groups, such as men from Eritrea and Afghanistan, also show similarly disproportionate numbers in these crime statistics.
Okay, so she has these numbers. How exactly does she weaponize them in a political debate? What is the core argument she's building?
From an analytical standpoint, Verdonk uses these statistics as a battering ram against the idea that culture doesn't matter.
Right.
She argues forcefully that culture plays a definitive, undeniable, and measurable role in how women are viewed and treated in society. She is directly attacking the Amsterdam City Council's progressive premise that everyone is the same.
She is saying, no, the data proves we are not the same when it comes to the risk of sexual violence.
She argues that men raised in certain cultures are conditioned to look at, interact with, and treat women fundamentally differently than native-born Dutch men are.
And she insists that if a local government is going to plan massive 750-person housing projects like the Haga Hospital, they have a moral obligation to weigh that cultural risk factor.
But she notes with immense frustration in the current political climate in The Hague, bringing up cultural differences as a risk factor is treated as complete political heresy.
It is a taboo subject. You are simply not allowed to discuss it without being accused of discrimination.
Which leads Verdonk to launch a blistering, deeply personal attack on what she calls cowardly administration.
She specifically targets the progressive left-wing parties in the council for this cowardice. She accuses them of operating with a profound, hypocritical, double moral.
I found the double moral argument to be one of the most compelling parts of the transcript because it highlights a massive ideological blind spot. How does she explain this hypocrisy?
She points out a glaring contradiction in their political behavior. On one hand, she says, politicians from these progressive parties will constantly stand on stages at public rallies, loudly proclaiming that they are the protectors of women.
They will lead marches demanding that women get the night back, meaning they should feel safe walking alone at night, and they frequently speak out passionately in support of victims of domestic and sexual violence.
But then comes the other hand.
Exactly. On the other hand, she claims that when it comes time to sit down in the council chambers and actually take practical preventative measures to stop that violence measures that would require acknowledging that certain demographics or cultures statistically pose a demonstrably higher risk, they refuse to act.
He completely shut down.
They refuse to make the cultural causes of violence a topic of discussion because it conflicts with their ideological belief that everyone is the same.
If we frame this within the broader political friction of our time, this is the ultimate tension between ideological egalitarianism and utilitarian risk assessment.
Let's try an analogy for this.
Imagine a city council that believes, fundamentally, that all dog breeds are exactly the same. They're all equally safe. That is their egalitarian ideology. But the hospital statistics show that 90% of dog bites in the city are coming from one specific breed. A utilitarian politician would say, we need special rules for this specific breed to protect people.
But the egalitarian politician would say, no, targeting one breed is discriminatory. We must treat all dogs equally, even if it means more people get bitten.
That analogy perfectly captures the impasse. The progressive ideology, as Verdonk characterizes it, is fundamentally egalitarian. Treating people differently based on group statistics is inherently discriminatory, racist, and wrong.
Verdonk's position is strictly utilitarian. If the data shows a 20-fold increase in risk from a specific group, a government's primary overarching duty to protect its citizens demands that they acknowledge that risk and act upon it, even if it completely shatters egalitarian ideals.
In fact, this divide is so deep that Verdonk explicitly states she refuses to join any local governing coalition with those progressive parties because she believes their ideological refusal to acknowledge cultural realities makes them literally incapable of keeping the city safe.
It is a devastating critique of how local administration functions, or fails to function, when ideology blinds it to data.
But listening to all of this, it begs a massive structural question. Even if a local city council wanted to change these policies, how much power do they actually have?
Are they really in charge, or are they just middle managers for the national government?
That brings us to Section 4, the failures of decentralization.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look closely at the systemic architecture of the Netherlands.
The interviewer, Summer, brings up a very common assumption. The Netherlands is widely perceived internationally as a highly decentralized democracy.
The theory is that local municipalities have a vast amount of autonomy to make their own choices, manage their own budgets, and shape their own communities.
But Summer notes that his observation as a journalist is the exact opposite. He feels it is actually a highly centralized system masquerading as a decentralized one, where municipalities have increasingly less room to maneuver.
He asks Verdonk for her perspective, given that she has sat in the national minister's chair and the local council member's chair.
And Verdonk has an incredibly nuanced, deeply critical view of this. She says she looks at the system from two different angles, and the conversation uses two massive, catastrophic case studies to illustrate how the system is breaking down.
It seems to fail regardless of whether power is pushed down to the local level or forced from the top down.
Let's look at case study 1, the youth care disaster of 2015.
The Jugbet, or Youth Law of 2015, is presented as a prime, catastrophic example of decentralization failing spectacularly.
In 2015, the national government decided to decentralize the entire youth care and child protective services sector, pushing the responsibility, the decision-making, and the budgets down to the local municipal level.
Verdonk, who mentioned she had previously held an advisory role in public health regarding youth care, says she saw this disaster coming from a mile away. Both she and Summer agree it became a massive generational mess.
Let's look at the raw statistics they discussed to understand the scale of the failure. Before 2015, when it was managed nationally, roughly 1 in 8 children in the Netherlands were receiving some form of professional youth help.
Once the municipalities took over, that number skyrocketed to 1 in 4 children getting professional help.
Think about that. 1/4 of all children were suddenly placed into the professional care system.
The local municipalities completely blew through their budgets, going bankrupt trying to manage the influx. It cost vastly more taxpayer money, caused immense stress for families caught in the system, and, according to Verdonk, didn't actually lead to better outcomes for the kids who truly needed help.
Why did it fail so badly? How does pushing power closer to the people result in a worse system?
Verdonk points the finger squarely at the hubris of the Association of Netherlands Municipalities, the VNG. She says they arrogantly believed they could take over this massive, highly complex, psychologically delicate sector and do it cheaper and better than the national experts.
But she argues they lacked a fundamental philosophical framework. They never established a clear definition of what constitutes normal everyday parenting struggles versus what requires severe professional state intervention.
It is like giving a prescription for heavy painkillers to everyone who comes in with a scraped knee, just because you have the budget for it.
Because there was no clear threshold, the moment parents went to the local municipality saying, "My teenager's acting out, I'm stressed," the municipality felt obligated to offer a professional program.
They professionalized normal childhood issues, overwhelmed the system with mild cases, and bankrupted the local governments in the process.
Exactly. So in that case, giving the municipalities the power was a disaster because they lacked the expertise to wield it.
But then Verdonk looks at case study 2, which is the exact opposite scenario, a strict top-down mandate forced upon the municipalities by the national government.
This is the spreidingswet, or the distribution law.
This law was created out of sheer panic. The central asylum reception hub for the entire country, located in a town called Ter Apel, was completely overflowing. People were sleeping on the grass outside. It was a national embarrassment.
So the national government decided to create a law that would legally force every single municipality across the country to take in a specific quota of asylum seekers, regardless of whether the local council wanted them or not.
Verdonk critiques this law mercilessly based on what she claims was a fundamentally broken, two-sided promise from the national government.
The premise of the law, as it was sold to the local municipalities, was supposed to be twofold. First, we distribute the current backlog of asylum seekers across the country to relieve the pressure on Ter Apel.
But second, and crucially, we will simultaneously implement strict national policies to radically reduce the massive influx of new people coming into the country.
But she says only the first part of the promise was kept. The national government used the heavy hand of the law to force the distribution down the throats of the local municipalities, forcing them to build massive shelters like the Haga Hospital against their will. but they totally failed to reduce the incoming numbers at the borders.
So the bucket keeps overflowing, and the national government just keeps forcing the local towns to buy bigger buckets.
And this dynamic leads to one of the most brilliant and depressing analyses in the entire conversation regarding the psychological illusion of democratic participation.
When a municipality is forced by the national distribution law to open a massive shelter, they naturally face massive local backlash.
To calm the anger, the local government holds town hall meetings and tells the citizens that they are invited to participate in the process.
Verdonk uses this incredibly bureaucratic term, the participation ladder. The local government sends out flyers saying, "Come to the meeting, climb the participation ladder. You can think along with us. Your voice matters."
Yes, but she argues it is a cruel bait and switch. Let's look at the psychology here.
When a citizen hears the word participation regarding a new building on their street, they naturally and logically assume they have a fundamental say in whether the center will be built there at all. They think they have veto power. They think they can say no.
But in reality, because of the top-down national mandate, the decision to build the center has already been made in an office in The Hague months ago.
Furthermore, the national agency, the COA, mandates that these centers must be massive, central locations like 750 beds because they are cheaper and easier to manage administratively than 10 small 75-bed locations. The macro-level decisions are entirely locked in.
So the citizens show up to the community center on a Tuesday night, fully prepared to debate the merits of the project, only to slowly realize the 750-bed mega shelter is already a done deal.
Their promised participation is essentially limited to completely trivial details. They are allowed to discuss what color to paint the new bicycle shed or whether the new crosswalk should be 10 feet further down the road.
The core decision affecting their neighborhood is entirely out of their hands.
This is exactly how they fake participation. And the psychological impact on the voters when they realize this is devastating.
Verdonk points out that this illusion of participation is incredibly damaging to the fabric of democracy. It makes citizens feel actively lied to and manipulated.
It leads directly to the rage, the protests, and the complete cynical breakdown of trust in local government that we see so often today.
You are explicitly told by your leaders that you have a voice, but when you speak, you realize you're just screaming into a bureaucratic void. The machine has already decided your fate.
It perfectly encapsulates the feeling that local politics is often just an administrative arm executing the unyielding will of the national government. The local politicians are just shock absorbers for national anger.
And this catastrophic failure of national policy is where the conversation really zooms out to look at the people pulling the levers at the top. This brings us to Section 5, National Policy, History, and the Constitutional Clash.
In the interview, they turn their attention to the newly appointed National Asylum Minister. The transcript specifically refers to him as Bart van der Breek from the centrist CDA party.
Verdonk, leaning heavily on her own past experience, sitting in that exact same ministerial chair, offers a scathing, almost disbelieving critique of his opening moves in the role.
She points out a fundamental, catastrophic error in his strategic communication. She notes that the new minister's very first public message, his opening salvo to the press, was to announce that the Netherlands has a desperate need for 88,000 asylum beds, and that they are currently short by 38,000 beds.
He basically held a press conference to say, "We have no room, we need tens of thousands of beds immediately."
Verdonk says that is the absolute worst, most naive thing a minister can possibly do. She argues that the moment a high-level government official broadcasts that they're desperately looking to create space for tens of thousands of new arrivals, human smugglers sitting in transit countries are watching the news, rubbing their hands together, and seeing a massive flashing green light.
The smugglers immediately spin this to their clients, saying, "Look, the new minister in the Netherlands is creating space. They're opening up beds. The borders are open. Let's go."
Verdonk argues that if the overarching goal of the new government coalition is to reduce migration, you cannot start with a message of accommodation. You have to start with a message of severe, unyielding deterrence from day one.
So what is her alternative? If she were back in the minister's chair, what levers would she pull to create that deterrence?
She outlines a very specific, aggressive strategy. First, she suggests immediately reducing temporary residence permits from 5 years down to 3 years, making the Netherlands a less attractive permanent destination.
Second, she advocates for ruthless, immediate return policies for anyone who does not meet the strict legal criteria for a refugee creating a hard, fast separation between genuine refugees fleeing war and what she terms fortune seekers looking for economic opportunity.
And she highlights a truly bizarre bureaucratic mechanism that she says has to end immediately.
Oh, this blew my mind.
In the Netherlands, if an asylum seeker applies for status and the government agency responsible for processing it takes longer than 6 weeks to make a decision, the government is legally penalized. They have to pay the asylum seeker a €1,500 penalty fee for the delay.
Verdonk is absolutely flabbergasted by this rule.
It represents a massive misalignment of incentives. She points out the absurdity. If a regular tax-paying Dutch citizen applies for a building permit and the local government takes 6 months to process it, the citizen certainly doesn't get a €1,500 apology check.
But the asylum system has this built-in financial penalty. She claims this money often bypasses the asylum seeker entirely and goes straight into the pockets of the asylum lawyers, keeping the whole cottage industry of endless legal appeals afloat.
She argues that ending that absurd penalty should have been the new minister's first move, not going on television to beg for more beds.
Her perspective on this is deeply informed by her history in the early 2000s, which was a period when the European Union was undergoing massive, chaotic, structural changes.
And the conversation provides this fascinating historical anecdote about her time negotiating in Brussels during the 2004 EU expansion.
This is a great story because it highlights how bureaucratic systems break down when cultures clash. In 2004, the EU expanded overnight from 14 countries to 24 countries, bringing in a huge wave of Eastern European nations.
Verdonk describes the scene of sitting at the massive, newly expanded negotiating table in Brussels. She describes a sheer, paralyzing culture shock.
The new ministers from the Eastern Bloc arrived completely unaccustomed to the fast-paced, highly structured, very blunt Western European meeting style.
Verdonk says they would arrive with massive, thick stacks of paper, fully expecting to stand up and read long, flowery, hour-long speeches about their national history.
Only to be told by the chairperson that they had a strict 2 minutes of speaking time before the microphone would be cut off.
She says the entire European bureaucratic system essentially ground to a halt. It was completely paralyzed for months because they tried to instantly merge two entirely different political cultures into one meeting room.
And that profound theme of cultural collision brings us to the most famous, or perhaps infamous, moment of her entire political career, which Summer brings up, the 2004 handshake incident.
Yes, they recall a moment that completely dominated the Dutch news cycle. Verdonk, acting in her official capacity as a minister of the Crown representing the Queen, attended a large formal gathering of imams.
She's walking down the line, shaking hands with everyone, and one imam specifically refused to shake her hand, stating it was because she was a woman.
Her reaction, which she recalls clearly in the text, was to look him in the eye right there in front of the flashing cameras and say, "We have a lot to talk about in the break."
That single tense moment sparked a massive years-long national debate about integration, religious respect, and gender equality in the Netherlands.
And this historical incident serves as the perfect, dramatic launching pad for the deepest philosophical debate in the entire conversation. This is where Verdonk and Summer truly clash, and it revolves around a fundamental, seemingly unresolvable tension deep within the Dutch Constitution, Article 1 versus Article 23.
Let's lay out the battle lines for this constitutional war. Verdonk's view is that over the last 20 years, despite all the debates, Dutch society has actually gone backward when it comes to integration and equality.
She lists her evidence, what she sees on the streets. She notes there are significantly more Islamic schools now than there were before.
She points out public iftar meals happening on open city squares where uniformed police officers attend to show community support. She argues fiercely that having a uniformed police officer who represents the monopoly of force of a neutral secular state participating in a religious ceremony is a direct, unacceptable violation of the separation of church and state.
And most emotionally for her, she says she sees more and more very young girls, as young as 4 to 10 years old, walking to school wearing hijabs.
For Verdonk, the solution to this societal shift is absolute, uncompromising, and unyielding. She points directly to Article 1 of the Dutch Constitution.
Article 1 is the bedrock of the state. It guarantees absolute equality for everyone and forbids discrimination on any grounds. Men and women, homosexuals and heterosexuals, all are equal under the law.
She argues that Article 1 must unconditionally trump every other right in the Constitution. She is furious that egalitarian ideals regarding women's rights are being quietly compromised under the guise of religious tolerance.
She even proposes going as far as Austria has recently done and outright banning the hijab in schools for young girls, arguing that allowing a 4-year-old to be covered enforces gender inequality from the moment they enter society.
But Martin Sommer pushes back, and he pushes back hard. He doesn't just agree with her. He mounts a rigorous defense of Article 23 of the Constitution.
Article 23 guarantees the freedom of education, meaning parents have the fundamental right to found schools and educate their children based on their own religious or philosophical beliefs, and the state will fund it equally.
He also points to Article 6, the freedom of religion. Sommer argues fundamentally and passionately against the concept of state pedagogy.
We really need to unpack state pedagogy because it is a crucial concept in liberal democracies. State pedagogy is the idea that the central government has the right to dictate exactly what moral values, what religious beliefs, and what cultural norms children are allowed to be taught by their parents and their communities.
Sommer compares this negatively to the hyper-centralized French system, where the state heavily restricts religious expression like the hijab in all public schools to enforce a strict secular identity.
He argues that in the Dutch tradition, the government's job is purely to ensure academic standards are met, that the kids can do math and read, not to act as the moral and religious dictator for every single family.
This raises an important question. How does a liberal democracy handle a situation where a specific subset of a religion uses the very laws designed to protect freedom, like the freedom of education, to potentially enforce practices that others view as deeply oppressive?
Think about it. Verdonk looks at a 4-year-old girl in a hijab at a state-funded Islamic school and sees state-sanctioned oppression funded by taxpayer money. It violates her belief in Article 1.
Sommer looks at the exact same situation and says if the government gives itself the power to crush educational freedom and ban religious clothing to stop what Verdonk calls fundamentalism, then the government has become authoritarian and destroyed the liberal system itself.
It is an incredible high-stakes philosophical standoff. What we are seeing debated here between a former minister and a journalist is essentially Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance playing out in real time.
Let's slow down and explain that for a second. What exactly is Popper's paradox of tolerance? I've heard the term, but how does it apply here?
Karl Popper was a philosopher who essentially argued that unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you host a dinner party where the only rule is absolute free speech and tolerance. Everyone is welcome.
Okay, I'm following.
But one guest arrives who violently hates free speech and spends the entire dinner screaming over everyone else, threatening them, and refusing to let anyone else talk. If you, as the host, tolerate his behavior in the name of your tolerance rule, the dinner party is ruined.
The free speech of everyone else is destroyed by the one intolerant person.
Popper argues that to maintain a tolerant society, the society must be intolerant of intolerance.
Okay, I see. So how does Verdonk use this concept, even if she doesn't name it?
Verdonk is essentially arguing the Popper paradox. She is saying that by tolerating fundamentalist religious practices like forcing young girls to cover up in the name of freedom of religion, the Dutch state is tolerating intolerance towards women.
She believes that if you tolerate this, the tolerant, egalitarian society is eventually destroyed from within.
Therefore, she argues, the state must use its power, Article 1, to aggressively ban the intolerant practice to save the tolerant society.
But Sommer sees a completely different danger.
Yes. Sommer represents the counter-argument to the paradox. He warns that if you use the heavy, violent hand of the state to crush religious expression in the name of equality, you destroy the very freedoms that define your democracy.
If the government can ban a hijab today to enforce equality, what belief will they ban tomorrow? Who decides what is intolerant?
Sommer warns that ignoring Article 23 is a dangerous, slippery slope toward an authoritarian state that dictates morality to its citizens. It is a brilliant, unsolvable knot of constitutional law. Both sides believe they are saving the soul of the democracy.
It is incredibly heavy stuff. We have literally gone from a politician filming rats near a trash container to debating the fundamental existential limits of a free society.
We really have.
But as we move to the outro of our deep dive, it is worth noting how this intense hour-long conversation actually ends. Because despite all the political warfare, the bureaucratic brick walls, and the profound constitutional anxiety they just hashed out, Verdonk ends the interview on a surprisingly sunny, deeply positive note about her genuine love for the city of The Hague.
It is a striking and necessary tonal shift. After detailing the catastrophic failures of both local and national systems, she speaks fondly, almost romantically, of the physical city itself.
She mentions the beautiful plain, the bustling Grote Markt, the elegant Den Haag, the historic canals.
It is a vital reminder that beneath all the abstract political theory, beneath the angry council meetings and the constitutional debates, politicians are very often driven by a deeply rooted, highly personal affection for the physical place they live. They fight because they care about the streets.
It really grounds the whole conversation. So, to summarize our massive journey today, we started with the visceral, visual reality of ombuds politics. A local politician using a Jaguar to fight for trash collection because the bureaucratic system completely ignores the citizens.
We examine the Haga Hospital as a complex micro-case study of how massive national asylum quotas force local, quiet neighborhoods to absorb huge, potentially unsafe demographic shifts.
We waded carefully into the highly volatile debate over crime statistics, exploring the deep clash between progressive egalitarian ideology and utilitarian cultural risk assessment.
We analyzed how decentralizing power often just means shifting the blame and bankrupting towns, while central mandates create a toxic illusion of democratic participation.
And finally, we witnessed a profound, unresolvable constitutional debate over whether strict equality should crush religious freedom, or whether religious freedom must be protected even when it seems to harbor inequality.
It is a stark, brilliant reminder that every local grievance, a full trash can, a new building on your street, a school in your neighborhood, is ultimately tethered to massive national and international forces and deep, ancient philosophical disagreements about what kind of society we actually want to live in.
And that leaves us with a final thought I want to pose directly to you, the listener. Take a moment to mull this over on your own commute or on your walk. In a world where global migration patterns and international treaties dictate the realities of your neighborhood, is the very idea of local politics becoming an illusion?
When the trash on your street and the fundamental rights in your Constitution are intertwined in the exact same bureaucratic knot, where does a citizen's true power actually lie?
It is a heavy question without an easy answer, but it is one we all have to face as we navigate these systems. Thank you so much for taking this incredible, in-depth deep dive with us today. We hope it gave you some fascinating insights, a few new ways to look at your own local government, and we will catch you on the next one.